Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute most shocking, culturally profound events of the entire 20th century. We're looking at a wild moment in time where ancient tradition violently collided with the modern world, creating this deeply fascinating cultural mystery that people are literally still trying to wrap their heads around today. Take a really close look at General Nogi Maresuke. This is a highly decorated, thoroughly modern military man in 1912. But on September 13th of that year, which just so happened to be the very day of Emperor Meiji's funeral, General Nogi did something almost unimaginable to the modernizing world. Right after taking a formal photograph in his crisp, Western-style military uniform, he went and changed into traditional samurai garb. And then, he committed an ancient, completely outlawed ritual suicide. As you can imagine, the world was just absolutely stunned. Western observers at the time, like the American correspondent Richard Berry, perfectly captured the massive confusion of the era. I mean, how on earth could a modern hero, a guy who literally commanded massive armies in the 20th century, engage in such an apparently out-of-date blood ritual? Was it just insurmountable grief? Was it madness? Well, to figure it out, we've got to dig way deeper into human history. Section 1. The global need for sacrifice. Coping with the chaos of a dying era. So to really solve this mystery, we first need to understand that following a lord into death isn't just some weird, isolated Japanese anomaly. Not at all. Historically, the death of a ruler unleashed some terrifying instability, and cultures literally all over the globe used human sacrifice as a sort of mechanism to safely navigate that really dangerous transition. We're talking everywhere from the ancient Egyptian tombs at Saqqara, where royal retinues were sacrificed, to the Scythian rituals recorded by Herodotus, where 50 attendants were strangled a year after a king died. Early societies heavily relied on these extreme acts to maintain order and protect themselves against cosmic chaos. And, the nuance of how these rituals actually operated is incredibly fascinating. Take the Aztec Tezcatli festival, for example. They'd choose a captive warrior to be an impersonator of the god Tezcatlipoca. And he wasn't locked away. He was venerated, treated exactly like a living deity for a full year. Then, when the time finally came, he didn't have to be dragged kicking and screaming. He willingly walked right up those temple stairs of his own free will to be sacrificed to the sun. It was an offering strictly meant to ensure the cosmos just kept on functioning. Now, the absolutely crucial distinction we have to make here is between involuntary sacrifice and voluntary self-sacrifice, because there's a massive, massive psychological difference between captive slaves being forced into a grave and individuals who performed voluntary self-sacrifice out of deep personal devotion. Just look at the ancient Romans practicing devotio. Roman soldiers would willingly share Emperor Otho's fate on the battlefield out of profound personal obligation. They had this love of death that secured their absolute honor. All right, let's bring it back to Japan and see how this all builds. What happens when you take this very primal, universal urge to follow a leader into death and, well, refine it? In Japan, this global instinct was eventually polished into a highly structured, strict ethical tradition tied deeply to the ancient clan system. Section 2. The evolution of junshi. From ancient sacrifice to samurai honor. So, let's talk about junshi. Over time, it evolved from those ancient religious tomb burials meant to serve a lord in the afterlife into a highly specific, secular samurai code. Janshi basically became a moral statement. It was the ultimate unquestionable demonstration of absolute loyalty and suicidal honor, proving a bond that was so incredibly strong it literally transcended death itself. We can actually see this shift perfectly in the story of Soga no Kuriyamada way back in 649 CE. Long story short, after being falsely slandered and accused of treason, Kuriyamada retreated to a temple. And to protest the slander and prove his absolute innocence and unwavering loyalty to the emperor, he strangled himself. But here's the crazy part. This singular act sparked a massive voluntary mass suicide among his family and his attendants. And they weren't doing it to serve him in the afterlife. They were dying to preserve their collective honor and make a powerful, undeniable political and moral statement. As the centuries rolled on and samurai culture really hit its peak, this intense act of devotion became super ritualized. This definitely wasn't something you could just wake up one day and decide to do. It required immense, lifelong discipline, intense mental preparation, and strict adherence to a really rigid set of rules governing exactly how and when it should be performed. And let me tell you, those rules were incredibly unforgiving. Section 3. The Rules of Seppuku. The Permission Paradox. Okay, here is where things get incredibly fascinating. Like I said, you couldn't just rush into death. The strict etiquette of junshi required explicit permission from your dying lord. Imagine that. A samurai who committed this act without his lord's blessing faced the ultimate shame. His sacrifice would literally be dismissed entirely as a culturally despised dog's death or inujini. Your lord essentially had to actively agree that your death would enhance both of your legacies. No permission, no honor. But, of course, there was a loophole to this strict rule, and it's known as the silent oath, or moke. Basically, if a profound, unspoken agreement existed between the lord and his retainer, a really deep spiritual alignment, an unpermitted suicide was paradoxically elevated. If you truly had a moke, your seemingly unlawful suicide instantly became the absolute most glorious proof of your shared spiritual identity. It was a massive, high-stakes gamble of honor. So, armed with all this intense history of ancient rituals and that highly secretive silent oath, let's jump back to 1912. We finally have the keys to unlock the mind of General Nogi Maresuke. Section 4. General Nogi's Burden, a lifetime of debt and suicidal honor. To really understand his final, shocking masterpiece of suicidal honor, we have to look closely at the crushing psychological and personal burdens he carried his entire life. I mean, just imagine the immense pressure he was under from day one. Get this, his childhood nickname was Nakito. Now that can mean crybaby, but hauntingly, it can also translate to non-existent person. It directly symbolized the huge burden placed on him as the surviving heir, who was entirely expected to somehow replace his two deceased older brothers. He was literally molded from birth to carry the entire weight of his family line. And this psychological weight just compounded massively when Nogi became a soldier. In 1877 Satsuma Rebellion, his unit actually lost the imperial flag to the enemy, which is an absolute career-ending disgrace for a samurai. He immediately begged for permission to commit seppuku to atone for the epic failure, but the young Emperor Meiji explicitly ordered him to live, and by denying him permission to die, the emperor saddled Nogi with a lifelong debt of gratitude and a suspended sentence of honor. Decades later, the burden became almost unbearable during the Russo-Japanese War. General Nogi tragically lost both of his own sons in battle. Devastated, yet totally resolute, he refused to adopt any heirs to replace them. In doing that, he essentially doomed his own family line to extinction. He became a man living as though he were already dead, just biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to finally repay his debt. So when Emperor Meiji finally passed away in 1912, Nogi knew his moment had arrived. Enacting what he firmly believed to be their silent oath, their moke, Nogi performed the most excruciatingly difficult cross-line disembowelment. He did this right in front of his deceased son's photos and the late emperor's portrait. Even his wife, Shizuko, joined him, dying by the sword. It was a perfectly timed ultimate atonement that wiped away 35 long years of suspended shame. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. Was General Nogi simply a man crushed by the weight of an archaic past, just an outdated relic unable to cope with the 20th century? Or was his meticulously staged death a deliberate, hauntingly powerful message, a final anchor of loyalty and honor, meant to steady a nation that felt it was rapidly losing its soul to modernity? It's a deeply complex mystery of human motivation and one that really forces us to look at exactly how we honor our own pasts. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll catch you in the next one.